Professor Doshi is one of India's most eminent architects. He has been instrumental in shaping the discourse of architecture throughout India and internationally. He has numerous prestigious awards to his name, including the 1993 Aga Khan Award and the 2018 Pritzker Prize, architecture's highest accolade. In the Pritzker citation, the jury noted his solutions take into account the social, environmental, and economic dimensions, and therefore his architecture is totally engaged with sustainability. Using patios, courtyards, and covered walkways, as in the case of the SET School of Architecture in Ahmedabad or the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore, Doshi has created spaces to protect from the sun, catch the breezes, and provide comfort and enjoyment in and around his buildings. He developed contemporary, regionally specific habitats that united modern techniques of fabrication with local crafts and traditions. Moreover, he has a deep sense of responsibility and a desire to contribute to his country and its people through high-quality, authentic, and sustainable architecture. Hello, Professor Doshi. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and thank you for agreeing to do this interview.
No, I'm so glad and thrilled that you have come.
Now, Professor Doshi, you have a long and illustrious career with over 100 projects, over 60 years in practice. But tell me, how did you come to be an architect? What were your key influences that led you to such a regionally specific form of expression in your work?
My journey has been several accidents, choices and opportunities. I was a student of art, and my teacher mentioned to me, why don't you go not for engineering or science, but join architecture. That's how I went into architecture in Bombay. Most important and memorable experience was my grandfather and his family, because in that grand family, in Indian grand family, is an extended family. And that extension can expand, into the street where all the relatives would stay next to one another. So for me, my memories are connected to people, relations, communities, lifestyles, rituals, because in that age, some people are 80 and some people are just newly born. So there is a cyclic order that I experience. And same way about the house which grew. So you add a staircase and you add a floor.
Your architecture or your building is quite unique because it does actually draw on contemporary materials as well as traditional materials.
That's right.
It uses different devices such as screens and shading, which is a modern interpretation of traditional ways of shading and providing ventilation and locking out the bright sun. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about the way you actually have mediated the climate in your buildings and use some examples.
So when I started the school in 1962, it was that kind of issue that we will not talk about architecture as capital A, but we would talk about architecture, a way of life, way of understanding, and it includes multiple disciplines. That is how CEP came. So the school was called Center for Environmental Planning and Technology.
So can you tell us something about how, when you designed CEP, these principles were manifest in the place that you created there?
For example, when the clients were my patrons also, when I selected the site, they were wondering why I have selected a ruined brick kiln. And I said, I want that brick kiln to be changed and used. So today it is transformed into rolling grounds and green grass and water harvesting. So all the things I did. Second was, when a student comes to a school or a visitor comes to the school, what is it that he likes? In the scorching sun, he looks for shade. In a dry place like this, when there are hardly any trees, you want to see some green. Then as you move, other thing that I do in my architecture is the process of entering architecture, the movement and the kind of interaction that happen into changing situations. So because the levels were different, I tried to use those levels, and you come far away. It's like a journey. It's like a story. So connections to me are very important with nature. So even though the space is enclosed, it should be open. Second is choices. A third one is discovery. The fourth one is communicating with the world outside and inside. All these things happen.
Can you tell us more about how you came into housing?
So I was trying to see how do you create social change? How do you create something that a client wants it, but I would like to see how disparities, disjunctions. For example, a child of the peon and child of the boss, can they cross the road? Can they play game together? In Indian conditions, you have to constantly find ways and means to create confluence of attitudes so that your learning, your living becomes much better and the ages disappear. And I thought that given a chance, everybody would eventually expand and grow. And this will be an incentive for them, the ownership, so that they would have the future. Their children will think about the future. And I think this is what changed my way. So we did the houses and then we made demonstration houses with Hardco. 60 houses we built, model, a ground floor, then a ground and first, then a ground and second. And we showed them how their cooperative can learn about creating jalis, employment, then social welfare, then understanding this. Second change, the biggest change was I did not put them together as one category, lower category here, a middle category here, upper category here. I had made them in such a way that they are in the center, the periphery was slightly bigger plots. So when you sell them, you get more money and subsidize them. So it is like reversing the order. You remove the ghetto, but you bring the ghetto within your family. It's like children, you bring and you make them grow. And that is the example, and I think that is one of the most satisfying things that I did.
What you've demonstrated over the time we've been talking is how you create enduring places that people love. It's about creating places which are not only sustainable but livable and memorable, and that is imbuing the culture of the place in which you work, but also understanding the regional differences and the particularities which you need to respond to in your work. How do you do that in a rapidly changing world?
So I think the whole question is, what is it that we want to do? For what purpose we want to do, and how does it affect human being, time, energy, relationship and ability to grow. I have not done something new. I have only done what I found in the villages and other places, and I just made that aranya. Empower people and do it within proper proportions.
Professor Doshi, it's so obvious that what you're talking about is a holistic, integrated approach to living and livability, which is really about not only how you live, but where you live and what you need to live with, which is totally about sustainability. And I think it's absolutely an exemplar in the way you've demonstrated that through your work that we have seen today. And I thank you very much for your time.
No, I tried. Thank you so much for coming here and talking to me about these things which I love so much. What I would just say is that the scale of work that we do, the kind of work we do, if we can look at the kind of lifestyles and people around which we have, the kind of heterogeneous society or inequality of society, if we can find approaches suitable to them, we will have better society and better places to live and better cohesion and more peace and prosperity.
I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
A good note to end on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Murcutt is a modernist, a naturalist, an environmentalist, a humanist and ecologist, encompassing all of these distinguished qualities in his practice. His is an architecture of place, architecture that responds to the landscape and to the climate. He uses light, water, wind, and the sun in working out the details of how a house will work, how it will respond to its environment. He works from a home office in Sydney and still works by hand, using computers only sparingly. And yet he still maintains a waiting list of clients who are keen to work with him. His work continues to be innovative and evolving. Thank you for joining us, Glenn, and it's a pleasure to be here and join you in your home office today.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you a few questions, but before we begin properly, I'd really like to understand some of the key influences. You have a very regionally specific form of expression and architecture, which is really a direct and visceral response to the landscape and the climate in which you're working. So what brought you to that way of working?
Well, I grew up in my first years in Papua New Guinea, and we lived in a region which was the lower end of the highlands on the upper Murcutt River. And so one took into account that whole question of security and insecurity in oneself, both physical and psychological. And observation became a very survival instinct. So observation of the landscape became part of that wonderful area of thinking. And that is to understand why things are so.
Your work has been described, and you've described your work as touching the earth lightly. Can you explain more what you mean by touching the earth lightly?
Now, to touch the earth lightly, first of all, you must have respect for that land. To have respect for the land, you don't mutilate it. You use it wisely, and the products you use, one is very careful about using them. For example, if one uses timber, which is a renewable resource, so long as it is renewable and it's not consumed at a rate greater than its growth rate, then it takes 5 megajoules per kilogram to have it in its final state as a piece of furniture. If we look at steel, it's about 35 megajoules per kilogram. And if we look at aluminium, it's 143 megajoules per kilogram. And we know each of these products, in gaining them, can destroy the planet in different ways. So one must use them wisely. I'm going to be using these products, but I'm very aware that one must minimize that high consumption of energy product. So if you're going to use aluminium, you use it in the smallest sections for the most appropriate requirements. And timber you can use much more. So touching the earth lightly is about understanding products we use and the basis of consumption. But it's also what we do with the buildings, how we place our buildings on a site, how we don't place it into the ground where it's going to change the water table, and that water table is going to change the flora each side and down below the building. To actually avoid air conditioning, design a building in a way that doesn't consume energy for cooling. These are some of the things. To use glass appropriately, to use roof overhangs, so that in summertime you've got beautiful shade in different parts of our climatic nation. The thing is this, that if you orient the buildings correctly, you see the winter sun angle is 31 degrees 33 minutes. And you can get that in a room that is 4.5 meters deep, going the whole width of the room, so the whole floor is bathed in sunlight. Now, that is not only warming that air spatially, but it's psychologically warming as well. If we take the Boyd Centre that Wendy Lewin, Reg Lark and I did in equal collaboration, it is a building for 32 children between the ages of about 10 up to age about 17 to 18 to come, and as Arthur Boyd wanted and Yvonne Boyd wanted, to use the building but not use up the environment, and to be able to become aware of nature. And so on that site, the location, it's very important in its siting, On one side is the native landscape. On the other side is the cultivated landscape. Is the planning strategy as simple as I can take it? Not simplistically, but as simple. Remember, simplicity is the other face of complexity. Like a very good stock, we take all that leftovers and we put them into water and we cook them for an hour or 2 hours, and it comes down to a cupful. Embodied in that is incredible complexity, but it's very simple. I love that simplicity.
What would be your sort of takeaway in terms of where to from here? How do we actually address this time and maintain and ensure we maintain a more sustainable and livable planet?
Because the planet is so being abused, I don't have to join that, and I won't join it. The greatest achievement I have in my lifetime is that I've survived doing what I want to do. That has been amazing, that I've decided I know what I want to do and I don't want to join the rabble. And I want to do decent work. Since most of us are going to be doing ordinary things in our lives, the most important thing is to do those ordinary things extraordinarily well. And to do that takes time. Thinking and designing requires a gestation period. It requires time. And remember that for every compromise you knowingly make in your work, and that's not about arrogance, that is doing something less than you're capable of. So that for that compromise, the built work, when the compromise is completed, represents the quality of your next client. So we get the client we deserve.
Well, I'm sure there's only one reason why you're a Pritzker laureate, and that's because you've maintained this absolute standard in your own work and in everything you've done. So thank you for taking the time today, Glenn.
It's been a pleasure, Helen.